What's up, everybody? It's your boy Tino here, and it is finally time to end this misery season that has been the Chicago White Sox. Yes, the White Sox have just swept the Los Angeles Angels, but they are still one game away from breaking the all-time MLB record for losses in a season for the modern day. So we're here today to end the season on a high note, talk about the good things that have happened in the series, try to look ahead to 2025, let you know what we'll be doing here in the offseason, let you know what's next for the Southside Boys in 2025, and so much more. We're not able to have Justin here today, but we got a special guest joining Deech and I. So let's get Deech in here, and then let's welcome our special guest. So my co-host for the last time for this season, let's welcome the man himself, Deech. What's up?
Yeah.
How you doing?
Sweeping the Angels is definitely not wasn't on my bucket list of things that were going to happen, but here we are. So yeah, let's end it on a high note. Look ahead to the future, which I mean you would assume would be brighter. I don't know how much duller we can get. So
I would hope so. And I mean, the title of this episode is the worst team in MLB history, but right now they're tied. They're not the worst yet. So, so they're keeping their streak alive, but now they got to go up against the team against the Tigers, against the team in the Tigers that is trying to make it to the playoffs. And last week we talked about it, Justin, you and I, about how the Tigers needed to jump bowl teams, and they have. And we'll talk about the playoffs in a little bit, but let's welcome our guest here taking over for Justin today. He's been on the channel a few times this season, been on the channel a lot since we started the Southside Boys. And he's here to give us some more hope and talk to us also about one of the affiliates for the White Sox winning another championship. So let's welcome from Future Sox back to the channel. It's Elijah. What's up, Elijah?
What's up, fellas? How you doing? Thanks for having me again.
I appreciate you coming back on here to talk about this season that has been, as it has not been the greatest of seasons, and it's just it's like I'm happy it's over, but I'm kind of sad that on Monday there's not going to be White Sox baseball, but we still got the playoffs, so I'm not too sad yet. But what you been up to, Elijah? What's been going on since last time we talked to you? I think the last time we talked to you was right before the trade deadline.
Yeah, man, I've been traveling a lot, definitely getting out there, a lot of work, a lot of baseball, but now I'm just kind of gearing up and getting myself ready for the postseason, man. It's an exciting time. This is, compared to the last 10, 15 years or so, this is just about the most parity we've had in the league in quite some time. No 100-win team for the first time in a decade. There's only one team locked into a seed right now with 3 games to play. Pretty incredible stuff. I mean, I think we're at a point now where you're like, there's a lot that can happen in the course of one weekend, basically. So I'm fired up. I'm getting ready for playoffs and just trying to enjoy. I enjoyed the, minor league stuff. The White Sox had one affiliate win a championship and one affiliate go down in the championship, right? So two of the affiliates were playing in, 2 minor league championships, which is pretty incredible, honestly, considering the recent history of the minor league system. So I was enjoying that. Now just getting geared up for the playoffs and kind of looking back at some of the minor league season as well.
Well, if you want to start with that, I figure we could start with that and talk about some championships. You want to talk about the affiliate that did win the championship and that did lose in the championship. For the people that don't know, let them know. And the minor league system looking good, and we were just talking about it literally right before we started. If they play like that and they're celebrating like that, I hope that they just continue to grow and we see it on the South Side one day.
100%, man. It's an exciting time. I think it's cool. I mean, you see the passion, you see the energy, you see these guys getting fired up, right? Like that's something we haven't been able to experience, and for a while with the White Sox, and especially in the minor leagues, right? The system has not been as good as in the past, right? Birmingham Barons, AA White Sox affiliate, taking home a AA Southern League championship. Pretty incredible, right? This is a team that was, at the beginning of the season, right? This was a rotation that was the best rotation in minor league baseball, featuring a lot of guys who are now with the White Sox, right? Your Drew Thorpe was leading the rotation. You had Harry Iriarte there. You had Kai Bush, who we've seen make a few appearances with the Sox. Jake Eater, who debuted with the Sox briefly, in addition to Mason Adams, who's still on the way, right? And then throughout the season, they've added talent and they've lost every single one of those guys from that initial rotation, which, from a minor league standpoint, right? Like guys are moving all season, but having an entire core of players that all of them get moved. In addition, lineup wise, right? Brooks Baldwin, Brian Ramos, Tim Elko, all those guys were down there to start the year when they were playing really well. They go through this lull in the beginning of the season, in the middle of the season. They really struggled. They lost basically their entire team. And then you see this awesome resurgence in the last month or two where they get this talent from the lower levels and then they start playing really well at the level. So it shows, the biggest thing that the Birmingham Barons season shows me is the organizational depth is in an entirely different place than it's been the past 5 to 10 years in terms of farm system, right? You had an entire core of players that were playing well in the first half of the season that all go up to triple, and many in Chicago, right? And then a whole group behind them, Noah Schultz, Riley Gowans, Tyler Schweitzer, a lot of these, Juan Corella, a lot of these pitchers, in addition to Rukui Nishida and Mario Camilletti and DJ Gladney and all these guys that come up from the lower levels. And then they go in with the playoffs. They didn't even start the year there. And then that core wins a championship in the playoffs in AA. So it really goes to show that the minor league system has talent throughout it, not just a few individual players, but there is waves of talent at each level in the system right now, which is something we haven't seen in a long time. And then that was pretty cool to watch because Birmingham's a great place. I was there last year. It's just a really fun stadium. There's a lot to love about it. So it was great for me to get to, see the payoff there after getting to visit some of those guys last year.
And I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, you mentioned it with all the guys that I think this is the first time, I think in a long time, at least in my opinion, that we've seen guys go from AA to the majors. Yeah. And some of them, like Brooks Baldwin, and before he obviously got injured and stuff, were making names for him. Brian Ramos looking like he's taking over the third base spot. We haven't seen Yohan since he came up. Some with his hat backwards yesterday. I was like, oh, true, there he is. And it's crazy to just see how much they've developed and seeing the way they celebrated, and even Sergio Santos and seeing what he's done with the Barons is just incredible to see. And it's something that we have not seen in any type of anything, and just that excitement level with these guys and seeing them grow in every which way. Like the Tim Elko's going from one level to the next. And, and it's a lot of these guys are guys that aren't like the big top guys. And I always talk about, I'd rather have a bunch of guys that are no names that are going to go out there and do the right things than have one guy out there that's just going to like, I'm very interested to see and excited to see what the future holds and where these guys continue to grow, because that's the biggest key, and to see if they can continue to do it in the major league levels. And some of these guys, like I said, we've seen already do it. And I think that's the biggest thing so far for me, at least. It gives me a little bit more hope than maybe in the past. Deej, how do you feel about? Go ahead.
No, go for it, Deej.
Yes, I will say, just to I did watch part of that last Barons game. It is somewhat exciting because even when you had the Roberts or whoever from the previous core, they all had very little stints, and it was, I feel like they were almost like they had a pillow like behind their ass for each time they fell. Like they babied the like major core guys that Han traded for, whereas this is more, you just feel they're unified. It's not just like, oh, there's one guy who's going to be an all-star and they'll probably call him up halfway through the season. I mean, and even when they do call them up, I mean, I've seen videos where, and just the support even on social media, there was not any of that with the previous core. I mean, Edgar Caro will sit there. No matter who has come up from the Barons, I mean, you see him constantly. Like Brian Ramos hits a home run, Edgar Caro sitting there posting Brian Ramos's like highlight of his home run. I mean, it's definitely a different culture on the minor league, I guess, levels, which should hopefully translate to the major league level, which is exciting. And yeah, I'm absolutely glad that Grady has handled the whole Yohan thing perfectly. When he gets asked about it, he's like, he doesn't have a future here, so I'm not going to take at bats away from Vargas and Ramos, who we know for a fact will be here multiple years after. So that's been good. Some of the pitching, I guess I would have liked to see move up more. Like you were talking about a ton of bullpen arms, and I mean, we've seen a few of them come up, but I don't like the fact that we sat on Chad Kuhl, and I mean, that's me just dumb, but at least with the Ramos and Vargas, when they brought Yohan back, I was like, please do not play this face. Zero.
And we saw some of it. I think that's the one positive. We have seen a guy like Fraser Ellard has given up he's given up a run in like one of his last 13 appearances. Fraser Ellard is like, he's a bullpen piece, right? Like it's a guy that nobody knows that name. That wasn't a name people knew coming into the season. And I did because I watch every single player in the system, but like, that's not a name. Not to be like, with that. But that's not a name that shouts out at guys, right? But that's a player who was finally given an opportunity after looking great in AAA at times. He had ups and downs, but he generally had a really good season and was finally given a chance. Like, hey, here's a guy. Let's test him out in the bullpen. Let's get rid of whoever it was. I don't even remember whether it was Brebbia or Wilson or whatever. I mean, there's the bullpen was terrible. The bullpen was awful all season, right? The first half of the year. It's just been a rotation of veterans who have done nothing essentially, right? And then you finally give an opportunity to some guys, and you've got Fraser Ellard and Prelander Baroa and other guys that have actually been really good down the stretch here. And like, I get it. They're not meaningful games. It's hard to put that much stock in guys when they, are basically the season's over. The games don't really mean anything, whatever that means. But like, there's pieces at each position, at each level of the organization that are major league pieces. And you go into next year now where it's like the Sox are not going to be good next year. I don't know if you guys know that, but like, they're not going to be they're like, no matter what happens this offseason, no matter how they handle things, they're still going to suck.
We're going to talk about that too, because Chris Katz had an interesting
I know,
comment.
we'll get to that. But with that said, right, like there is pieces in place. The notion from a lot of fans and people that just watch the team that there's nothing and it's just nothing but awful is a little bit of an exaggeration. Like, I get it. Yes, this is going to be the worst team of all time. I will be shocked if the White Sox sweep the Tigers with the way the Tigers are playing right now. Maybe they will, and that would be the funniest thing ever if they finish the season on a 7-game winning streak and don't break the record and just tie it. That would be hilarious. But I don't think that's happening. I think the Tigers want to make the playoffs and are very serious about making the playoffs. And I don't think the White Sox get a hit against Tarek Skubal, to be honest. Maybe they get one, maybe two. We'll see. But, point being, like, there is pieces in place. And I think that is the biggest thing to take away from watching the minor leagues have so much success this year. And Kannapolis, right? Kannapolis just lost in the final winner-take-all game of the championship to a top 100 prospect in baseball who was pitching, right? Like, there's a lot of situations with a different pitcher on the mound where Kannapolis also wins the minor league championship this season. They were real close to it. And that's a really fun core down there. That Kannapolis team is made up essentially of half of the 2024 draft guys that just got drafted, right? So they're older guys and they're too good for single A, but they just got drafted. And then half super young, high upside guys in a George Wolko and a Ryan Burroughs and a Ronnie Hernandez, right? Like there's a lot of talent and there's a lot of pieces and just better energy. There's better energy, man. Since I saw you guys last, I spent a week and a half or a little under a week in Charlotte and Kannapolis with Jeff, my podcast co-host at Future Sox. And we went to candy games. We went to 7 games within 6 days when I was there. And we were just at the game. We were talking to players. We talked to 20, 30 players within a few days, right? I mean, I was talking to every guy there and just feeling the energy, seeing what they were doing, seeing the work they're putting in. And like, there is a much more positive atmosphere in general in the minor league system than there's been in Chicago in quite some time, right? So it's like, that's a good thing. There's something happening. I'm not saying the organization is in a great place because we know they're not, but there is generally a better feeling and a better energy and just development within the minor league system that, in my opinion, at least gives some hope for 2026 and beyond,
I do. So I guess prior to the season, if you would have told me that they would be as bad as they are, and then next year there would be no hope of them really even attempting to put a competitive team on the field,
right,
I would have been probably irate. But at this point, after the season, the way it has played out, Detroit is not going to be shitty anytime soon. I mean, they have built a massive core. Cleveland, no matter what you think happens to Cleveland, never go away.
They're going to be good. They're going to be good.
Kansas City, I would say again, they went and spent at the right time. Will probably be good at least the next year or two.
Yep.
I mean, Minnesota is the only one that could really decline, in my opinion. And even they have some pieces where you're like, they can't get that. They're not going to be like terrible ever.
They're going to, I think Minnesota's on somewhat of a downward trajectory generally, but you're right though. It's true. You've got 3 young teams in this division who are all, I mean, I don't know, for people that don't know that carefully, right? Like Detroit and Cleveland also have top 10 systems in like the league right now in terms of farm systems. So like those 2 are going to be beasts. And Kansas City's also on a really good track. I mean, when you have Bobby Witt and a few other pieces they have there, like you're going to be pretty decent for a long time to come. So like the notion of like, let's try to get good is just kind of a waste of time. Like you have to sign some pieces. If they go out and they don't sign a single free agent, that'll upset me because that's just absurd. Like no matter how bad you are, you have to try and plug some holes and try and add to the young core, right? Because going into next year with a team of basically entirely rookies would just be malpractice because you don't want to put those guys in that situation. But at the same time, primarily young guys, I'm fine with. It's going to be a while, like you just kind of got at, right? Like it's going to be a little while. The division is, people were talking all this smack about the AL Central going into the year, and there's 4 teams in the AL Central that are in legit playoff contention with 3 games to play. That's freaking crazy, first of all. And that shows that the division is good. Like this is not some sewer division like people made it out to be last year and the year before. This is a good division and a good division with a lot of young teams. And it's going to take the White Sox some time to be able to compete in it. And because of that, I'm okay with next year being another year that's, pretty crappy, but at least young guys forward in addition to a few external additions that can help kind of burden that ease, for the young guys.
So you told me I got to watch another 120 loss team again?
I don't think so. I really don't. I think you might have to watch about 100 loss team, but I don't think it's 120 loss team. I'm hoping. We'll see.
Well,
I will say this.
It's going to be more exciting than this year has,
Yes.
because you're going to have all the young guys up, and that's their year to kind of figure it out. Whoever's going to stick is going to stick, and then you work through your mistakes. So if you lose a game because Brian Ramos makes an error at third or something stupid like that, at least okay, well, it's not Yohan Moncada who's going to be sitting on the IL next year there's actually like hope with some of the young guys moving up. And I guess, yeah, I can agree with what Elijah said. If Chris Getz went out and signed absolutely no one in free agency, you'd be like, all right, what the fuck? Like,
yeah.
But now you can at least see to just be more transparent. The whole this offseason, they played this game of the Eric Fedde with the 2-year deal where, we're trying to solidify our rotation for the next 2 years. And then at the deadlines, our intention was always to trade Fedde. It's okay, well, I mean, go into next year and say we need this year to literally see where our development has brought us over the last 2 years. You add pieces that most likely you're going to trade at the deadline. And then make it transparent to the fans, and I think you'll win a lot of them back.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. I get that, and I understand that atmosphere from the fans. You can't, as a general manager of a major league team, just admit that you were going to trade guys. It's just kind of not going to work because you lose all leverage in that situation, and you put yourself in a position as a GM where players then aren't going to trust you, and teams are also going to take advantage of you even more because they know you're doing that. And people do know you're doing that. He can't say that directly. And I think that's what, at times, I wish fans would read between the lines a little bit more, because I get the frustration with Getz, and I hear you. And I do agree there's certain things he can be a little more transparent about, but he can't just say, hey, we suck. We're going to suck next year too. He can't say that. That's his job on the line. That's the reality is I know that is appealing to people and people want that transparency. As a GM, you can't just directly admit that. Do I think he can handle things a lot better this year? Yes. And do I think he can be more honest about the status of the organization? For sure. But there is a balance there between him protecting his job and the needs of the organization and keeping the organization kind of secured versus also making fans happy, which I do understand. But I think it's the way I look at it, it's complicated, but it's really not that complicated of an offseason. I think the hardest part is figuring out the Crochet and or Robert trades, right? That's the complicated part. I think the tricky part is maximizing value for Crochet, figuring out what the heck to do with Robert after the year he just had, and trying to see if that means keeping him for the deadline versus just trading him and seeing what you can get at this point and calling it a day, right? Those are the complicated decisions. The roster decisions aren't that complicated to me. You don't, there's positions you don't need to, if they don't sign a single pitcher, I'm perfectly fine with it. I don't think they need, I think you could sign maybe one veteran quality guy just to solidify and give some stability, right? I'd say 1-2 maybe vet pitchers, sure. You don't need to stress about this pitching staff. You don't need to put money into it. You don't need to do anything with it. You have so many arms that some are going to fail, don't get me wrong, but you have more than enough arms to fill a 2025 roster from all the guys that have spent the season in Double and Triple A, that you can see what you have and at least build a core of pitchers from what you already have. You have to sign some bats. There's just, that's the reality, right? No matter what you do, you have to sign a few hitters that are at least major league caliber hitters, right? We're seeing roll out with 5 guys who wouldn't even be touching the field for most major league teams right now, right? That's crazy. And you've got to sign some bats, right? But it's 2 to 3 significant hitting signings, right? If you can get one guy that you think is a core piece moving forward, great. But if none of those pieces want to sign with you, which I don't blame them, then okay, whatever. You sign 2 to 3 veterans, and if they perform well, you flip them. And if they don't perform well, so what? It doesn't matter. There's no money on the books right now. The only money on the books is Andrew Benintendi and Luis Robert, and Luis Robert might get traded. That's literally the only players making more than $5 million going into next year on the entire roster, right? You have tons of money. Even if Jerry wants to cut payroll by $50 million from where it was the past 2 seasons, right? You still have $50 million plus to spend on hitters. Get a few hitters. Don't worry about your pitching staff and let the young guys work. You've got, if you look at it from a positional standpoint, right? I'll let you guys, I don't want to keep ranting too much here, but if you look at it a positional standpoint, right? You've got your 2 catchers. You do not need to touch your catching situation at all. Edgar Caro is going to be the primary catcher. Corey Lee is the exact type of player you want for a backup catcher, not a starting catcher, but a backup catcher. Cool. Done. Got it. Brian Ramos, Miguel Vargas going to be there. Colson Montgomery soon enough is going to be at shortstop. He's going to the Arizona Fall League to get more innings. He looked really good in September. A little note for White Sox fans. Colson Montgomery, it's been a rough season. Last few weeks, he looked really good. He's going to get some more innings in September or in October in the Arizona Fall League, and we'll see what he's looking like. But he's going to be there at some point, right? Like there's infielders in place. First base, I wouldn't mind them signing a first baseman. I think the Andrew Vaughn time is kind of over. And then beyond that, right? Like it's, I think you've got other options in different places. But I do think it's like you can sign a first baseman. Outfield depends on Robert, I guess, right? Like it does depend on Robert kind of, but you've got Benintendi unless you trade him, who's going to be there. You've got a guy in Dominic Fletcher who's looked solid at times. And then you've got, Robert maybe, but you also should sign an outfielder, right? Sign an outfielder, sign at least one infielder, maybe a first baseman, maybe a second baseman, and see what else you've got for the rest of the young guys, right?
Yeah, and you're completely right on all of that. And you mentioned, we talked about the bullpen earlier, and you said how they have completely just kind of turned around. They've shaved off 2 points off the ERA. They had a 5-point ERA in the last, I think it is 6-7 weeks. They have a 3. So they've completely turned it around, and you've met the bats have been the biggest problem all season. They can't score runs, and Chris Flexen, thank goodness for the 7-run inning today, because Chris Flexen has not won a game since May 8th. And all of a sudden we get some run support, and he's been a good pitcher all year. He just never got the run support. And I think that's the biggest key, as you mentioned. And what you said was, don't go after any pitchers. The pitchers that we have done very good. And the Frazier Ellards, or the guy that we got from the Yankees, I think has actually done pretty well. It's like these guys that they're finally getting the opportunity. And I think it has helped, obviously, the season that they're having. But if they can take these confidence into 2025, I think they do definitely shave off 20 games off the losses, or maybe even a couple more, where maybe they don't lose 100 and maybe they surprise a few people. Obviously, like I said, I don't think they're going to be good, but I think they need to get the right people in the right spots to be able to do this. And as Chris Getz finally said in everything that he said, he did mention rebuild. He did mention about guys that they traded at the deadline, that's what he wanted to do. And I think that was the biggest thing, the biggest problem, where he just wouldn't say it. It's like, why didn't you just say that? Because maybe us fans wouldn't have been so upset. And, I think that's the biggest thing, is the fans are tired of being lied to after all the nonsense that we've been through with everything. But, yeah.
Now, with Andrew Benintendi, unless you get him, would you really bother trading him? I mean,
yeah, it's almost not worth it at this point, right?
I mean, that's kind of where I'm at. I mean, someone clearly, I kind of feel like Grady Sizemore put his foot up his ass after they let go of Pedro and was like, enough of the shit. We're paying you a shit ton of money to be a veteran presence in this. Because he used to be kind of very to himself. He seems more engaged. I mean, it could have been just the injury and he just didn't feel himself. But I mean,
yeah.
Breakdown with Frank Thomas breaking down his swing from the beginning to end of the season. I mean, he had a massive leg kick at the beginning of the year where he's sitting there with his lead foot every single pitch. I mean, unless you can really get something for him, I don't just understand dumping salary for the sake of dumping salary when, I mean, you have $34 million committed before arbitration. Stuff.
I think it depends, right? If you can get something and you want to, this is my thing. If they want to actually spend some money, sure, trade him and save that money, right? If they're actually going to spend some money and sign some guys, then I'm fine trading him, because the fact that I do think this is probably better than he's going to be. I think his first half is probably worse than he's going to be long term, and what he's doing in the second half, I don't think is sustainable. I don't think he's that good of a player, frankly. But like you said, if you're not going to spend a ton of money, you might as well just hold him as a guy who can at least be a decent piece in your lineup. Even if he regresses to, he has an 850 OPS in the second half. Let's say he regresses to a 750 guy. If he's a 750 guy, I'm perfectly fine paying him that money, just because there's nothing else to spend on, right? So it's sure, I'm fine with it. And you need some, like I said, you need some pieces in the lineup to be filled, right? You can't just rock with the current lineup and, whoever you have right now. You got to add some guys to the young core that's going to be on their way as well.
Yeah, and I do not, as much as I don't mind Amaya doing what he's doing at shortstop, whatever, I really don't want him to play shortstop forever. I'd rather see Colson Montgomery. So,
And the other thing, right, is then it goes to the coaching, right? Because that's a whole other topic that we can talk about briefly. But it's I Personally, fellas, I am seeing way too many people hopping on the Grady Sizemore train right now, in my opinion. I don't think Grady is a bad manager, and I think it'd be great to keep him around. I would love to keep Grady around in some sort of capacity. Please hire someone from outside of the organization for once. Please. This manager should not have any ties to the White Sox organization. That's my opinion. I'm very firm in that. I'm going to stand firm in that. I love Sergio Santos. I think he did a great job in Birmingham this year. I know he said yesterday after the championship that he would love to be considered for the White Sox manager job. I think he'd be an awesome addition to the staff as a pitching assistant or a bullpen coach, maybe. Find a role for him. He's been great. He has been amazing with all the pitchers down there in Birmingham all season and the energy as well. Grady Sizemore, I think, should be kept around. Make him the bench coach. Sure, why not? I'm totally okay with that. It seems like a lot of the guys really like him there. They respect him. I know that's a demotion, and you don't see that often, but like he knows that he wasn't necessarily qualified for a manager job, right? Like I think he's aware of that. He's not an idiot, right? Like that's he was given the job, and I didn't mind it because I like the energy he's brought. This manager should be someone from a successful organization that had many, many years of coaching experience at the highest level. And I will stand firm on that until they announce the decision. And that's my take on it. But
many years.
I was watching the Blackout show, which I know you've been on a few times.
Yeah.
Today, and they were talking, and I'm spacing on his name now. That guy from the Dodgers, the first base coach.
Yeah, who was mentioned in the
overly high on him, and just after Ozzie Jr. explaining his reasoning for it is, I mean, he semi-sold me on don't just buy into because he's from the Dodgers. Let's just automatically assume he's going to be like stop. It's definitely an interesting thing. I just Pedro has scarred me. This whole like bench coach from any team.
Like, PTSD over here.
I mean, that made me very nervous. I get from person, but oh my god.
I get it, man. I hear you for sure. It's tough. I don't think I'm curious to hear Junior's take on that. I have to go back and listen to that a little bit, but I don't think it's just like a good team means a good manager. I think a good manager candidate is highly likely to come from a successful organization, but there is way more that goes into that than just, saying, oh, random guy from the Dodgers, you're it. Like it's not that simple, of course. What I would hate to see is just not a search. I think you need to take time to scour and to see every option instead of just saying, hey, Grady Sizemore, this is yours. Or, hey, Sergio Santos, this is yours. You've been with the organization. You know us well, like take the job. I just don't want to see that. I can't do that again. It's just too White Sox to continuously give the job to people that are familiar with the organization and have ties to the, to Getz and the Reinsdorfs and whatever it is. Like, I just don't want to see that. I mean, look at for example, I have this tweet written as we talk because I'm going to tweet this at some point after we get off the show. Imagine if the White Sox hired AJ Hinch when they had the opportunity to. The White Sox had the opportunity to hire a manager that went to multiple World Series, developed the heck out of a young core, and was incredibly successful in every year of his head coaching career up to that point. The White Sox instead hired Tony La Russa. The Tigers right now with AJ Hinch was this just the Pedro year? Hinch might have just been the Pedro year, honestly. Hinch wasn't even, I don't even think he was that long ago.
Yeah, no, it wasn't that long ago, and I think you might be right, too, because I remember when AJ Hinch got hired, and my friend literally called me. He's like, this is going to be the worst mistake the White Sox make. And now that you mentioned it, it's crazy to see how the AJ Hinch has done what he did with the Tigers, because the Tigers were really bad for a couple of years, and Baez was gone, and there's a lot more to it,
right? There's way more to it than just a manager, right? But like the energy in Detroit, I don't know if you guys have watched a Tigers game recently. Holy crap, man! It is electric.
It's like on Maggio in the Prince Fielder and all of that era.
Yeah, and Mickey and all that. I mean, it's true. There's so many layers to it, but like they have to nail this hiring. This is this is big, right? Like this is going to the entire the coaching staff as a whole, not just the manager, right? It's not just about one manager, right? The entire coaching staff needs to be better, and it needs to be a staff that has a balance of letting young players develop and grow while also lighting a fire under this organization and creating an energy and a force that makes this team go the right direction in the future. It's not going to be a one-year process. Nobody's coming in and taking this team to the playoffs next year. I hate to break it to people. Like, this isn't the Royals. I know it could happen, right? Like, it's possible. But at the same time, like, it's not going to happen in a year. Can it happen in a few years with the current farm system as it is? Like, I know people don't want to believe it. And I know, so every time I post something positive on Twitter, I feel like I'm just going to get bashed for it because everybody's just like, oh, the White Sox suck. It's never going to happen. Like, I posted something the other day about, like, you know, how Birmingham's success is hopefully going to translate in the few years, right? Like, and everybody's just like, I've got a comment. One guy commented and was like, no, it won't, because of Reinsdorf. The White Sox suck forever. I'm like, okay, yeah, they do. Sure. Like, let's be that way. Right. But like, there's some things to build on. It just, there's steps that need to be taken this year and this offseason to set that up to happen in the next few years.
I do also have a little bit of hope that this historically bad year has embarrassed Reinsdorf enough to the point where and I thought I heard it or read it somewhere, that he seems to be more open to listening to Chris Getz and Tony La Russa, because Tony La Russa apparently is the main reason Chris Getz was even hired. Who would have thought that? Apparently Tony straight up went to Jerry and was like, he's the right man for the job.
I love it.
So, I mean, that's just it. You would think after this bad, because now Jerry's getting nationally slammed. It's not like before we saw it constantly because we're in Chicago, we follow the team. Now you have like random fans who are just like,
yeah, definitely
how ridiculous it is. I think that hopefully has pushed him to a point to realize,
sure,
do you want to be the next John Fisher or not? I mean, that's really what it's coming down.
Oh, he's going to be that. So yeah, you're right.
So, I mean, maybe he does. I'm not saying next year he's going to just be like, open my checkbook, because he knows they're not really in a position to do that. But maybe in if Getz can at least show progress where there is a legitimate core. I mean, he let Rick Hahn spend money. So, I mean, when everyone acts like Jerry's ridiculously cheap, he's cheap compared to other owners in a sense. Sure. But I mean, Rick Hahn had payrolls that were what, 200 million, multiple years. I mean, it's not you starting with 34 million. I mean, you can that'll build up a little bit each year as the players like advance their arbitration and stuff like that.
And they can also afford to do some of these early extensions, right? Like I get it's risky and people were scarred by that, right? Like I think people hate the idea of like these long early extensions, like the Moncada deal and the Eloy deal, which obviously panned out very poorly. Do it again. I don't care. I mean, seriously, try it again. The idea behind it wasn't bad. The idea behind it, I always enjoyed Rick Hahn's forwardness and trying to get after contracts early and often, right? Because you're seeing teams do it now, and teams like the Braves who are in, ridiculous situations. Yeah, they're having a rough year, but besides the point, like they have a ton of guys on team-friendly contracts because they got ahead of it and they got ahead of contracts. Same thing with, Baltimore hopefully is going to do it at some point, but I mean, there's other teams that have tried to do it and it's hard. But that Rick Hahn was kind of ahead of the game with that, and I know it didn't pan out, but like if Yohan Moncada had reached his ceiling, right? Like with the White Sox, they would look genius right now for the way they've handled that contract situation. I know they don't, right? Like that's not the reality. But I'm okay if you're going to be cheap in the short term and not wanting to sign guys. I'm okay with giving a few long deals to some guys early on in their career, right? Like if Edgar Caro starts the season next year and looks like what I think he can look like, screw it. 6-year deal. Why not? That's like having a catcher that's been competent behind the plate since AJ Brzezinski. Give me a 6-year deal for Edgar Caro. I'm perfectly fine with that. If you have tons of money to spend and you don't want to spend it on big free agents, and the White Sox aren't going to bring in big free agents because of the system, because of the way the team's been the past few years, right? Like spend some money on some of the young guys. Give them some early contracts, right? Just say, hey, we're going to lock you up. We want you to be here and be a part of this core for a long time to come. I'm okay with that. I don't mind it. I know it didn't work last time, but you never know, right? Like see what happens.
I completely agree with that. I do think there needs to be like a little like prove it. Like what you said, if Caro
for sure.
Next year, then you do it. You don't just. Yes. That's where I think Hahn got ahead of himself with a few of them.
I agree. Yeah.
But I mean, they thought Moncada was going to be the next Manny Machado. I mean, with how much they invested in him, they like legitimately thought he was going to be a superstar, and it just
and for good reasons. But yes.
But I mean, look at Cleveland. They're sitting on Class A as a complete steal. I mean, they extended him, and even I know
nothing
wasn't necessarily early on, but I mean, they locked him into a ridiculously cheap deal to some of what these other guys are getting. I mean, there's hesitancy, but I see and I do to that extent too. I almost feel like to get players to start trusting the organization somewhat to an extent, you have to show good faith
Yeah, I agree.
Things like that. Otherwise, everyone's kind of like, well, I'm just here until the end of my arbitration, and then you're going to trade me here. So,
yep. No, I completely agree. I think it's a tough position to be in, but I think there is somewhat of a path forward. This season has sucked, but I think there's a lot of pieces. I think the pitching development, I mean, I think you're looking at a top five system in baseball when it comes to pitching. I mean, I think there's pitching at every single level that is legit talent, right? Like there is a lot of pitchers. Like there's a chance where, there's a world where at the end of next season, we see a rotation that has Drew Thorpe, Noah Schultz, Hagen Smith, beyond, keeps going, but even those three is a ridiculous start, right? Like Iriarte, Adams, there's a lot of guys. And then you've got pieces offensively. You need to do more, right? Like the offense, the farm system offensively is nowhere near the pitching system, but there's stuff in place and there's pieces, and you're going to see a roster with 50% or more rookies next year, which I'm here for. As a guy who covers prospects, I'm so here for, and I know these guys.
You're loving it. You're like, hell yeah.
I mean, I'm here for it. Like these are great dudes. I know a lot of these guys and been talking to them as they've been developing the last year or two, right? And like, there's a lot of really awesome guys who really, really want it. And the guys who really, really want it are the guys that I want to see up there and see working. I mean, Sean Burke, man, this is a guy that I talked to Sean Burke last year when he was dealing with surgery and he was going through all arm injuries, right? Sean Burke, nobody was thinking about Sean Burke 6 months ago, right? Like I had an interview with him in like April, and I think it was like one of my least listened to interviews, honestly. Like that's okay, right? Like that's fine. Sean Burke has been the best pitcher on the White Sox the last month. And this is a guy, like seriously, right? Like there is so much depth of pitching from so many random places and so many trades, development guys, draft guys. There's such a wide variety of arms. And that's exciting. That excites me. And I think a pitching staff with all these young guys next year and a bullpen with all the young guys is going to be really fun to watch. Get some bats, find a manager, flip Garrett Crochet for some bats, and let's do it. Let's see what happens. It's not going to be pretty, but you're going to see a fun young team next year in comparison to this year. And I think you're setting yourself up for the ability to compete in a few years. I'm not promising a World Series. I was the guy in 2017 who was like 2021 White Sox World Series, and that was the year it could have happened, right? My mind wasn't totally off there in terms of my projection, but at the same time, like, yeah, it sucks. It sucks that one playoff win against Houston was the peak of that rebuild. All right, cool. Wrap it. Let's move on to the next one. Let's try it again. And I don't like
move it and wrap it. And I also think the biggest thing too is, just before I forget, Deej, because I almost forgot about this. I was listening to the post-game show today, and they kept mentioning it. I've also said it, and I've talked about it a lot. This should be now where they want to they don't want to be like the Astros, the Royals, the Guardians, like you said earlier. Be the White Sox, be the Chicago White Sox. Build something where you can have like a name. And Garrett Crochet said it in a couple comments that he mentioned about how the thing is, how it's been the last few years and everything else like that, and how in 21 it was, and so I think that's what the White Sox need to do, is just make sure that they can do that. And, with some of these guys, like even like Ramos and Baldwin, seeing them come up, they feel like different types of players that we've seen before with, like you said, like giving that contract to Kiro. Seeing him come up and seeing him play like an AJ Brzezinski type or something like that would be it would be awesome, because we haven't seen it since AJ. We haven't had those types of players, and we see these teams that find these players and they make it look so easy. So hopefully the White Sox can do that, because as you said, it's not going to be great next year, but if they can just keep building and, and it just sadly is like we're restarting in 20. We're just kind of restarting in 2016 now. And, it's funny that they should name the 30 for 30 when they do this, the parade that never was. That's what it should be called.
It's a good title.
Because there's going to be something about this, and it's not going to be fun, but it's going to be something. I hope maybe they'll do something, and it will be something that we talk about in 5-10 years that is just a laugh, and we'll be like, they're one of the best teams, because I think we all bought in. And I think that's and I think all of us just kind of have to wait for it and see what happens. But Deej, what were you going to say?
I wanted to ask you mentioned flip Crochet for some bats. When you're talking bats, are you talking major league ready bats, or are you talking like low level but high upside?
Little bit of both, Deech. That's my opinion. I think a Garrett Crochet, I wrote like so many articles, I feel like, about Crochet during the season, because it was like he was just kept coming up in the news. I'm going to, at some point in October, attack a new story with a new angle and kind of the new suitors I see and all that stuff, because I think it's about time to start looking at it for the offseason once the playoffs get going. But I think it's both. I think it's one immediate big league lineup guy. You need somebody who's young, but will be in your every single day lineup from like now on, basically, right? Like that's one guy. You need one of those. And then you need one high level prospect who is near big league ready and can be a big league piece in the near future. And then you need one guy who is a ton of upside and very young and in that next core with a Walco and all that kind of era, the next kind of phase of talent. I think it's 3 players at least. It could even be a 4th as a flyer as well. But I think it's one of kind of each developmental stage. I think it's an everyday big league guy. It's a near big league ready, high upside prospect, and it's a long-term high level project.
Will the big league guy be better than Vargas?
I hope so.
Man,
Nope,
that guy.
no promises.
I was
Yeah.
Vargas at first, but like, holy Christ, he just does not look comfortable at the plate.
Yeah, it's not pretty for sure. And now, I mean, I've always kind of said that I'd rather see him as second, but now you've got, I mean, believe it or not, you've got in the last month, Lenyn Sosa looks kind of good. So I don't know where that has been all season. I don't know why I get the whole regular bats thing, but at the same time, it's been so not exciting for so long that it's kind of crazy to see it like be good. But it's going to be tricky to figure out exactly, how to shake out the roster and exactly how to time things up. But at the same time, like there's some pieces. There is some pieces. I keep saying it, but like there's some pieces and you got to add some pieces. But I would much rather watch the youngest team in baseball possibly next year than watch all the players we watched this year that we know were not worth any of our time.
They're just going to be added to the list of players that we have already watched in the misery of being Chicago White Sox fan. We are kind of
I did make the joke last night when Sosa homered that him getting hit in the head by the ball inadvertently during one game saved his career. Because he's really, ever since then, I feel like every time I turn on a game, Sosa's like getting on base, getting a home. I mean, it's just like, what the heck, dude? Where'd this come from? But I mean, that's what you hope. I guess when I've watched interviews with Colson Montgomery or any sort of articles, they ask him about like the adversity he's faced this year. And I mean, I feel like at least he's answered their kind of inquiries about it very well and seems to be taking it more as a challenge as opposed to getting defeated or anything like that. Who knows? Maybe this year of struggles leads to him coming up and being one of very few White Sox prospects who just like clicks at the major league level. I mean, look at how many guys on the Orioles do it. I mean, eventually we have to have one guy who comes up and is just like a legit piece. You would think. I mean,
you would think. I frankly think that's more likely to be Caro than it is to be Montgomery, at least off the bat. I think Colson's going to take some time, but I still am very confident in Colson being a big league piece for the White Sox. I think Caro is the one where it could be like we could get a month into next year, and it's like, hold up, this guy's catching well, and he's getting on base a lot, and he's hitting pretty consistently. And I think that's very realistic. I mean, Caro's ability to get on base is up there with almost any prospect in terms of his walking, his patience at the plate, on top of the fact that he's really tapped into his power this year and made some adjustments with his swing to generate more power. So he's the guy that I think like you're going to see like a few months into the year next year. And it's like, oh, that's our catcher for like a long time. And that's going to be pretty cool because that's a valuable position. Like, let's not forget how important having a catcher is to a major league team that's successful. I mean, look at the teams that are really good come playoff time, and a lot of these teams are teams with star catchers, right? Like, look around the league. I mean, seriously, think about Phillies, Realmuto, Dodgers, Will Smith. It's a decently common trend.
Gabriel Moreno last year
was a dog, right? And from just managing a pitching staff too, right? Like, it matters. It very much matters. Austin Wells has been a revelation for the Yankees this year as a rookie, right? Like, there's a lot that goes into it. I think I think Carroll's one. I think better times are ahead for Ramos. I do. I think this season's been weird for him. That absolute, we didn't even talk about this, but that absolute ridiculousness when he got called up for a day because they needed a roster fill a month ago, and then he gets sent right back down, and then he gets called up actually 5 days later, and then he doesn't play for the first 3 games he's up or whatever. They've been treating Ramos like a roster fill guy all season when I think he's one of the better hitting prospects in the system. And it just does not make sense. And he was hitting incredibly well in Charlotte, in August. And when I was out there in Charlotte, he was on fire. And then the whole up and down just turn it over. Just let the young guys work. That's what I've been saying all episode. That's what you guys know I believe. And I think there's better times ahead. I do. That's what I'll leave the White Sox fans on for this. I mean, I think there's good things to come. That's what I'll put it.
Well, with that, why do they keep switching Vargas and Ramos at their can't Vargas play multiple other positions technically? I mean, I know
well.
Great outfield.
He said not well.
He plays second though, right?
Yes, he was a second baseman coming up his entire career. So at this point, I'd rather see him at second. Yes, I think Ramos deserves to be getting everyday reps at shortstop or at third base, pardon me, just because I do think he's a good third baseman. Like, that's the other thing. It's like, if you're trying to get Vargas at a position where he's most comfortable when he hasn't shown to be that great at any position versus Ramos, who's like a good third baseman, and he's proven to be a good third baseman for an entire 2 years now, right? Like, I don't know.
I mean, you've been talking about Ramos. I remember you talking about Baldwin and Ramos last year when you were on the podcast. You were talking about them possibly coming up this year. So it's just crazy that we're even talking about that. But with everything that's going to happen next year, we are also getting a new network for the Chicago White Sox. And NBC Sports Chicago is saying goodbye on Sunday, and there will be the last broadcast. They're showing all the parades from the championships. They have some beer money. They need to bring back beer money, man. I love beer money. But I had a question for both of you guys, and I want to ask you, Deech, what was a game that maybe you remember on NBC Sports, or a game that you just on the network that maybe you remember that was just something that, like, you'll always remember the last 20 plus years, however long it's been since?
I feel like it's impossible for me to even pick just one. I mean, I've watched a ton of sports on that network. I do. I honestly can't think of like one specific one even at this point.
Elijah, do you have any specific ones?
Remember.
Remember?
To be honest, even though this is not necessarily a positive memory, I remember earlier in the season during one of the losing streaks or something, I just remember a game where they flashed to like Ozzy and Chuck, and they're both just like laying on the floor. I was like, it just had me cracked up because it was the perfect like example. It was just the perfect like thing to showcase this season. I remember at the time where he was just like, he literally they couldn't even handle it. They both were just like, what is going on? This is ridiculous. And it just perfectly summed up this season. I also do remember a really good one back in 2021 when the team was doing good. I remember one of the pregame, post games in general it was sometime late in the season when they were either about to clinch or right after they clinched. Maybe it wasn't the actual clinching one, where they were just, the energy was just great. And then they had like Scotty Pods on, and they had Gordon on, and it was all those guys. And they were just kind of reminiscing in a way of just like, when was the last time we were this excited about the White Sox? And obviously that was short-lived, as we just talked about today, but some good times. There was some good times for sure. And I think they do a great job. I've loved a lot of the production over there. I think they really do a good job. When I was younger and when the Sox were really playing well too, like I used to really enjoy watching those post-game, pre-game stuffs and all their coverage, right? Like it was a great time. And I think it's been a good ride for sure.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing about it is too, with just everything that they've done, is they've brought, like, especially with Chuck and Ozzy, they've just brought a different type, where like the late night with Chuck and Ozzy. I think that's exactly what it was. It was that late night where they were I forgot who they lost to or whatever, and they went to the eighth inning thing, and they're both laying on the floor, and it's stuff like that you don't really see done on post-game shows. And I've watched a lot of post-game shows recently on watching other baseball teams, and this thing I've been using is I watch the post-game and pre-game shows, and it's not like that. And it just, Chuck and Ozzy brings something to it. And I'm happy that they will be returning next year. For what I know, I think that most of them are returning. Also, Steve Stone will be returning next year. He also announced today that he will be coming back for extended period of time. He didn't say how many years, but I'm just assuming until he says I quit, which probably I'm assuming basically like 2 more years, because he's probably going to go on the Hawk schedule soon or something like that, where he only does like home games and
something like that,
road, or So the last question I have for you, Elijah, before I let you go, is: will the White Sox become the worst MLB baseball team in MLB history this weekend? Yeah, they will. I think it's cool to see them just getting hot right now and stopping right at the tire of the record and not breaking it. But Detroit's on a heater, man. I would be, no matter how good the Sox are playing right now, Detroit is on a heater, and they need to clinch a playoff spot this weekend. So I think all those factors leads me to believe that the White Sox will become the worst team in MLB history. And frankly, like,
I'm not cheering for it. I think that was kind of a ridiculous look in my opinion. I don't know about your guys' take on that, but I thought it was. I know Garrett Crochet was like, I don't like it. I'm not going to say anything more, and I think he handled that as good as he could have. I think it's like, that was a good approach. I'm not going to cheer for them to break the record. I think that's kind of absurd. At the same time, like, does it kind of represent what the season was? Like, yeah, it does, but like, they'll break it. It is what it is. Move on. It doesn't. 121 losses versus 90 losses has the exact same outcome in this season at the end of the day. I know it would feel a lot better. I know it would feel less painful, but it's kind of the same outcome ultimately.
I could hope the like booing after they won games.
Yeah.
Just like, okay, I don't know. I mean, I've said I hope they lose every game till the end of the year in like a rage, like when I was just like irritated. But people kept asking me, "Are you going to one of the games? You going to?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not going," because I knew if I went there, just irritate me being around people who think all you're doing is poking the bear, which is just,
right.
I mean, it's not going to accomplish anything.
Yeah, I'm with you on that front.
And
not at all.
This is ridiculous.
Yeah,
Crochet,
I'm with you there.
Comment, but I mean, they can't really say that much because then the fans will just turn on them. So they just kind of avoid it.
Right.
Well, Elijah, I want to say thank you, man, for coming on for another season of the Southside Boys, coming on a few times this year. Definitely have to have you on again next year, and hopefully we'll be talking about a bunch of the players that you mentioned this year and Edward Cuero and all the good stuff. But you want to let people know where they can find you, what you'll be doing this off season. And
yeah, man, I appreciate you having me on. I'm always happy talking with you guys. I love doing White Sox coverage. It's not, we'll see where it leads in my life, but it's, obviously a huge passion of mine that I spend a lot of time on. So Elijah EV8 on X, this is where all my stuff is. I'm doing plenty of stuff. Future Sox podcast will be releasing an episode. We're going to do an episode tomorrow where we dive into the Kannapolis Cannonballers season and wrap up kind of just like everything about their championship run. And then next week, we're going to do a Birmingham Barons episode where we dive into their entire season. So really provide some good information on just everything that happened in the minor league system this year, the two teams that went really far in the playoffs. Right. And then beyond that, I'll be writing articles. I'll be doing White Sox, previews of the offseason and free agent targets and trade ideas and all that stuff in between. So a lot of White Sox coverage. Justbaseball.com is where my writing is. Future Sox for the podcast stuff, my Twitter, all that stuff. So I'll be cranking it out. I'm excited. I'll definitely be engaging with you guys and everyone else that I love talking to on the X. And otherwise, I'm always happy to join you guys, and I look forward to joining next year and hopefully talking about a lot of these young guys.
Hopefully, and I appreciate. Hopefully, there's more wins to talk about. The fact that the 39 wins in September still kind of boggles my mind. But Elijah, have a good one. Have a good off season, man. And we'll definitely see you around here on the channel.
Appreciate you guys.
See ya. Well, Deech, thanks again to Elijah for always coming on. We're done here for the season, bro. What do you got to say now to the people? And do you believe the White Sox will become the worst team in MLB history this weekend?
Yeah, Detroit's not going to get swept. I mean, I'm sorry. They literally can make the playoffs if they win probably just one game. I mean, I just don't. And Skubal, I think, is pitching against us, isn't he?
Yes. I think it's tomorrow, because I think it's Skubal and Crochet. I think, because they said they wanted their best to go up against our best today.
Yeah, but they said Crochet is going to be on an inning limit. So, I mean, all Skubal has to do is just out-pitch him through 4 innings, and then it's just kind of like, all right, here we go.
Yeah, I mean, we're just going to have to wait and see.
Crochet, they just are limiting how many pitches he throws. I mean, as much as people have bitched about him being bad in the second half or whatever bullshit people are tweeting, the dude's a stud. And even every time he talks to the media, you're like, that's a dude you want in your clubhouse. So it sucks that we may have to sit and see him be traded this offseason. I'd love for them to try and extend him at least. But we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, we're just going to have to wait and see. We're just going to have to wait and see what happens this weekend and see what happens this offseason. But that is how we will end the 2024 MLB season with the Southside Boys, as they do end the season this weekend in Detroit. Detroit playing for the playoffs. We'll have to see who is in the playoffs on Monday after the season ends and see what happens with the Chicago White Sox. It's been one hell of an awful season for the White Sox, but it has been a fun year to come here every week and hang out with you, Justin, Elijah, and all the other great guests that we've had on the show this year. So Deej, you got anything you want to say to the people until we see them, until you at least see them next year, because they'll see me tomorrow.
Maybe we'll be at Sox Fest.
I don't know about you. I will be. I'm going to Sox. I don't care what it is. I love Sox Fest. I'm going. So you better be at Sox Fest. I need some type of reinforcement.
Yeah. You're gonna get booted. You're gonna start booing when they have Chris Getz speak. So,
Imagine they do, where it's like if they have like a sign, if you boo, you get kicked out. I'd be like, that's lame as hell. I'd be like, come on now. But yeah, we'll have to see, and we will definitely keep you guys updated on all the socials and everything else like that throughout the offseason. We'll be doing some shorts, stuff like that, so definitely keep an eye on. Obviously, if there is any big breaking news where players traded, firing, etc., maybe we'll come here for an emergency podcast. But, guys, we're wrapping up the season. The White Sox sit at 39, and 120. They need one more loss to break the record, and we'll see if it happens. But we did say the White Sox are the White Sox, and they may just pull the White Sox and sweep the Tigers, but probably not. And you know what? If they do, maybe I'll just come here and rant for, I don't know. Anyway, guys, thank you all so much for another season of the Southside Boys. As I said, we'll be back next year, and hopefully they win 39 games by, like, June. Maybe. We'll see. But, guys, you know where to find me on all the socials. You know where to find us, Southside Boys 23. Go follow us on all the other socials. Go and check out all the other episodes. We've had a lot of great interviews as of lately. But just because Deech is leaving doesn't mean I'm leaving. Because you guys know we'll be back here tomorrow night for Friday Night SmackDown. So, guys, enjoy your Thursday night. Go enjoy some Thursday night football. And I'll see you all tomorrow night for another Friday night on the USA Network.